each of your seats is a little gift for you. If you can just, probably have to do a little bit of digging around there, but you'll find it. What you're looking for is probably either a pebble or a flower or a shell of some sort, a little piece of earth. Yeah, found it? Got it? Everyone found the little gift? Okay. So now I want to take this thing in your hand, and I want you to look at it, and I want you to remember, just for a minute, that this is the most beautiful, most special, most magical thing that you've ever seen. I want you to remember that time when you were 5 years old and by the ocean, and you saw the ocean for the first time and picked up a little shell and put it in your pocket. Or the time that you fell in love and you took the roses that your lover gave you and pressed them in between the pages of a notebook. Or any moment of connection or union, and just hold on to this thing for a minute. And even if nothing comes to mind, that's okay, because I want you to love it anyway. And I want you to love it because this is mystery. I want you to hold on to this because this contains within it the mystery of the entire universe. We don't know where it's come from and where it's going. When I was a little girl, I believed that the moon followed me home every night. I believed that ladybugs were always female, and clouds were shapeshifters that would tell different stories to me. I believed that I'd seen all of the interaction design and all the universe in the gentle opening and closing of a touch-me-not plant. And it wasn't just nature that was beautiful, it was also technology. My grandfather gave me this tiny little pocket watch when I was a little girl. And this piece of technology became an instrument of wonder for me. There was something about its gilded silver lining and kind of, engraving into it, and the fact that it had been made by someone and not in a factory, that made it into my time traveler's device as I went off on adventures across my imagination. Now, as I grew older, I started to grow afraid that technology didn't do the same for me anymore. Somehow, my phone became into a veil between me and this mystery. I needed it to enjoy the sunset more for some reason. And so, as someone quite young, at 21 years old, as a children's book illustrator, I started creating a series of interactive books on the iPad called Khoya. Being a little bit of a technophobe, I decided that I'd get over my fear of technology by engaging with it, using the mobility of mobile devices to get kids outside of their homes, using things that were practical and logical, like augmented reality, to create moments of mystery and magic. There we go. Khoya did really well, and it was tremendously beautiful and satisfying for me to do. But again, as I started to grow older, I was worried that was this the only way I could hold on to magic, by illustrating children's books endlessly? And then I realized that actually, even as adults, there is another moment of magic. Now, we feel magic and this connection to nature when we fall in love. So every time I fall in love, which is pretty much every 20 minutes or so, I'm in love right now with all of you, with this flower, I enter into this intimate relationship with this person, and it's beautiful. But in the process, I also enter into a relationship with nature itself. So the moon appears a little bit brighter in the sky, the stars shine just for me, the rain falls at the perfect moment of the first kiss. Has anyone felt that way before? Anybody? Yeah? All right. This idea that you get butterflies inside of your stomach, felt that so many times, feeling that right now. Was all an expression of love. And I started to wonder whether it was really this longing to be in union with this person, or whether the greater longing was to be in union with nature itself. I realized that this was all around me, even in the language that I was reading, this idea of the wind caressing you or waves lapping up against you. There's so much intimacy and richness in there, so much sensuality in there. And I realized that also I wasn't alone. Now, while science tries to explain and unfold mystery, poets have always drawn alongside it. They don't try to explain it, they just draw alongside mystery. And so Neruda said to me, I want to do to you what spring does to the cherry trees. Kalidasa, an ancient Sanskrit poet, he compared the eyes of his lover to Padmapana, the one with the languid eyes of the lotus, or he called his lover Digambara, she who wears nothing but the skin of the sky. This was all so luscious, but the mystics, the mystic poets, took it even further. This is Akka Mahadevi, who's this 11th century Indian poet, who took off all of her clothes, covered herself in her hair, and went running through the forest singing songs to Chenna Mallika Arjuna, the Lord as white as jasmine flowers. And as she repeats his name over and over again, calling to this Lord as white as jasmine flowers, after a while you forget about the Lord, you forget about her lover, and all you're left with is the smell of jasmine. Now, I was heady with all these jasmine flowers and love songs, and I happened to be actually at a TEDx in Brazil a couple of years ago when I fell in love with a neuroscientist, as one should. And though our love itself was very short-lived, our collaborations were not. Now, he'd spent many months studying the brainwaves of meditating monks in the Himalayan mountains, trying to understand what happens to the brain when we meditate. And so we got really excited and started to talk about using all of this technology of the quantified self, which is particularly in San Francisco, everyone's excited about right now, being able to track your heart and your steps and how well you're sleeping and basically build on your idea of yourself. But we wanted to use the technology of the quantified self to break down the self completely. So we began with this one project called the Lotus. Now, the Lotus was basically kind of inspired by things that have always existed in traditional Indian cultures. It was a tiny little object that you'd connect up to a NeuroSky headset, and then as you'd meditate, the Lotus would open and close and become into a very tangible, very real expression of your inner emotional state. This was a really interesting first step for us in our work with technology, but soon we realized that we actually wanted to step away from the mind completely and move towards the heart. Now, we'd been exploring this idea of biosynchronicity, this idea that when people spend enough time with each other, their body rhythms start to sync up, kind of like fireflies in a forest. So I'm sure most of us in this room at least know that when women spend enough time with each other, our menstrual cycles sync up, right? But aside from that also, when a teacher is giving a class, there's been a lot of research in Stanford in particular that when a teacher is giving a class, the breath rate of everybody in that classroom starts to sync up with the teacher. And it's possible that it's happening with me right now as I'm breathing through this talk as well. We then started to look even further at the heart and started to look at how when people in long-term relationships with each other spend enough time with each other, their heart rates actually start to sync up. Their hearts start to beat in time with each other. So that's why they say that, when you have a broken heart, it's literally because you've lost the partner who your heart has been beating in time with for years and years. So we got together with an architect and a fabricator and a programmer and went off into the desert to Burning Man and created Pulse and Bloom. Now, Pulse and Bloom is this oasis of oversized lotus flowers that have pulse sensors at the base of it, and when one person puts their hands on the flower, it starts to glow in time with their heartbeat. But when two people put their hand on the same flower, you can see both projected heartbeats beating off into this flower and making this invisible world inside of you visible through technology. Suddenly you have a moment to almost feedback upon it, to bring yourself to a moment of concentration or awareness. And as we sat in the desert, we saw through the night in particular, people syncing up heartbeats, looking at themselves, looking into each other, which is incredibly beautiful. But true to the nature of my exploration, I realized that actually it wasn't just human love that I wanted to explore. I wanted to explore my love for nature. And so I started working on a series of Geo Feedback installations. For some reason, our ancestors and the ancients were really interested in this idea, and I know why, that we could create objects that would interact with the forces of nature, these large, invisible forces above us. And so I created these series of little shrines that have basically pull data off live weather channels and interact to the motion of wind over the earth, or the waves lapping up against the shore, or the movement of planets, and became into kind of reminders that we are connected to something much larger than ourselves. And then thinking about wind as much as I started to think a little bit further about how wind is actually something that's inside of me constantly. There's this magical forest called Brindavan in the north of India where Krishna, the Lord of Love, supposedly lives. There are lots of beautiful stories and poetry about how Krishna enters into the forest and then there's embodiment and then he leaves and you long for him. And the word Brindavan itself means forest of vines. So I started thinking about how perhaps, like a lot of mythology in India, this forest wasn't some faraway place in Uttar Pradesh, but actually was a forest of vines inside your lungs. And every time I breathe in, I'm breathing the out breath of a tree. And when I breathe out, I'm breathing back into the tree. And so the next exploration was then Brindavan, or the forest inside your lungs. And it had a breath sensor that it was connected to. And as I would breathe in, the whole room would glow with me. And as I would breathe out, it would all turn to darkness. This year at Burning Man, we're actually going back and taking it one step further. And Grove is turning into an actual grove full of these huge trees with LEDs, breath sensors that come out in the shape of these flowers. And as you breathe in and out of the flower, the whole grove starts to pulsate with you. To end, I want to actually read this beautiful poem called When I Was the Forest by Meister Eckhart. And it goes, when I was the forest, when I was the stream, when I was the forest, when I was still the field, when I was every hoof, foot, fin, and wing, when I was the sky itself. No one asked me, did I have a purpose? No one ever wondered if there was anything I might need, for there was nothing I couldn't love. It was when I left that all that I once was, that all the agony began. The fear and the questions came, and I wept, and tears that I'd never known before appeared. And so I returned to the river, I returned to the mountains, and I asked for their hand in marriage again. I begged to wed every object and creature. Thank you.